Good afternoon. Equities edged higher ahead of the Federal Reserve's policy meeting this evening. Mainland Chinese shares also climbed as investors try to weigh speculation that China may scrap its COVID-0 policy. Meanwhile, locally, DisChem pharmacies reported a surge in half-year earnings, benefiting from acquisitions of new baby stores and a demand for medicines after the easing of COVID-19 lockdowns. DisChem also declared an interim dividend of 44.3%. At its interim results presentation, the pharmacy chain made mention of its commitment to the principles of equity in pursuit of its strategic objectives. Let's take a listen to what the CFO, Rui Manuel Moraes, had to say.
The establishment of a skilled and transformed workforce that is representative of South Africa. I think underpinning all of our strategic objectives is the principle of equity, and we are ambitious with respect to our healthcare objectives, and as is the nature of that, we want equity within access to healthcare, and that same is true around a skilled and transformed workforce. So that will underpin our strategic growth drivers to ensure the longevity of the business, and obviously the contribution of us as a South African corporate, to the transformation of South Africa.
Well, that was the DisChem CFO, of course, talking to us about their commitment to their equity objectives and also how it plays into their strategic objectives for the next 6 months and going forward. But to talk to us about the latest when it comes to the markets, we are joined by Chantal Marx from FNB Wealth and Investments. Chantal, thank you so much for your time. I mean, what would you say if you look at the JSE's performance? How are you thinking about equity markets at this particular moment?
Well, there's definitely a cautious vibe in equity markets, not only on the JSE, but globally as we await the big, important Fed decision tonight. The expectation is that the Fed is going to raise rates by 75 basis points, but any kind of deviation around that or clues as to what will happen in the future will really determine what direction markets go into over the next couple of weeks and months. And that's more or less where we're sitting at the moment. We have a few shares doing well today. We have a couple maybe paring back gains from the last few days. Naspers and Prosus kind of stands out there. And we have the platinum miners doing quite well. Of course, they are not nearly as dependent on global sentiment per se and the Fed direction as the technology shares, for example.
Let's stick with the theme of the Fed because, I mean, a couple of months ago, we were looking for a Fed pivot. Now it's been described as a dovish pivot. And I'm wondering whether we might be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, given the fact that we haven't seen any compelling economic data to show that inflation is indeed under control. So I'm not quite sure what the market is looking for really in terms of signals. How are you looking at the situation?
So the pivot is completely chaotic, right? Because everyone has a different idea of what that pivot is going to be. I guess what we're just looking for at the moment is any sort of change. So anything that doesn't mean another 70 or 75 basis point hikes into perpetuity, I think would be welcomed by the market. And that is what the market is looking for. As for the pivot in terms of when they're actually going to start cutting rates, I think we're still a long way off. We first need to start increasing rates by lesser amounts, then we need to see rate increases stop, and then only can we start talking about a true pivot in the sense that a turnaround in monetary policy will take place. So still a lot has to happen before we get there. And the data is still not really supporting a full pivot, right? We still have inflation quite high and remaining quite sticky in the US. The jobs market is still quite buoyant. And we really haven't seen that big slowdown that the Fed was expecting when it started on this aggressive rate hiking path.
We've just kicked off a new month, and it's quite incredible how quickly this year is going. How would you characterize the month of October, given some of the moves we saw, especially when you look at the Dow?
So there was definitely a softening in sentiment during the month of October. We did see markets actually move up for the most part, both in South Africa and abroad. We actually saw some really good returns from the JSE. And I think that we're definitely seeing things calming down a little bit in terms of fear. And you would have seen that in gauges like, for example, the Fear and Greed Index as well. So October definitely a little bit better. We were just speaking to our strategist yesterday, and he quipped that October generally is a good month for equity markets, but it's also the months where most of the chaos happens or the big flash crashes happen. So I think we dodged a bullet there, and hopefully the rest of the year gives us more of what we saw in October.
I kicked off, the segment with a soundbite from the DisChem's interim results presentation. What did you make of the numbers?
So I think DisChem actually had a really good set of results, and you would have seen that the share price also moved up, whereas Clicks, their competitor, saw its share price move backwards on the day. So there's definitely been a sort of shift in sentiment favoring DisChem over Clicks. And the reason is that we are seeing sales growth, particularly in retail stores, exceeding that of Clicks. We also saw some other positive moves within the DisChem stable in the way that they're doing business. In particular, I like the fact that their working capital cycle is shortening, and that means that they are managing their operations a lot more efficiently, and we did see margins improve as well. So all positive takeaways.
Before I let you go, earnings that you're keeping an eye on?
So I think our focus will remain on US earnings for the most part. It's still very, very busy there. We have probably over 30 or 40 companies releasing results today. So far, earnings season has been quite muted. It's been up and down. And hopefully we will be getting a little bit more clarity as we wrap up earnings season in terms of where corporates are expecting to go over the next few months.
All right, Chantal, thank you so much for your time. That is Chantal Marks from FNB Wealth and Investment, and of course with two little friends that you would have noticed on your screen behind her. But that is it from me. Of course, we are going to be paying attention to that fourth Fed announcement. Market expecting 75 basis points. We'll unpack what that means for you. But also tomorrow we'll do a nice comparison in terms of the Fed's moves compared to South Africa and why the Bank of Japan is the outlier. And we'll unpack that for you with an interactive graph so you can see where the different central banks are seeing their monetary policy. That is it from me. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have more news for you, so stay tuned.